Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. American's Moments in Geography. We are going to continue today learning about Russia and the independent republics. So for my students, again, this would be a continuation in Chapter 15 in our textbook. And today is finally the day where we get to talk about those independent republics, as we've been able to cover Russia in the previous videos. So what are we going to be able to do today? We're going to be able to identify the Caucasus republics, and we're going to be able to describe their cultural and their political traits. We're also going to identify the 5 Central Asian republics, and we're going to be able to describe their physical and political features. We'll get into their economics as well as their culture today. So let's go ahead and get started. So one thing I do want to note about several of these republics is that they were all a part of the USSR, or the Soviet Union, until it collapsed in 1991. But let's start with the republics of the Caucasus, named, of course, for the Caucasus Mountains. Let's start with Armenia. For my world history fans, especially World War I, this would be an area, of course, that has some more challenging history, particularly when it was part of the Ottoman Empire during the Armenian Genocide. But today, Armenia makes up, population-wise, it's right there around 3.2 million people, and those people, the majority of which ethnically are Armenian. When it comes to their faith, we tend to see Christianity dominate here. About 94% belong to the Armenian Orthodox Church, so certainly another branch of the Orthodox faith in Christianity. We're going to also see that the majority of the population is urban, 70% is, which makes sense given the physical geography of Armenia. Its capital is Yerevan, which is one of the world's most ancient cities. It's been very long established for quite some time when it comes to the history of the world. This is also an area, because of its geographic location and its physical features as well as geological location, that it does deal with many serious earthquakes. And over time, that has been a very big challenge for the Armenian people. Azerbaijan is also, if we look back here at the map, you can see this also being a part of the country is split in half by Armenia. Most Azeris speak the language of Azeri, and it's a population of about 8.2 million people, so a little bit bigger than Armenia. We tend to see, as far as faith here, given our proximity towards Southwest Asia, that Islam is definitely the majority of the faith or of the religious practice here, which means its followers are Muslims. One big difference for Armenia and Azerbaijan is where people live. So in Azerbaijan, you're going to see almost a split of 50-50 between urban and rural areas, which is part of the reason why the agricultural practices, and especially cash crops like tobacco and cotton, are fueled by irrigation, which is a big part of the economy. You're also going to see that oil and natural gas that are connected through the ports in the Caspian Sea do hold some promise economically as well. And the capital is Baku, which is very prominently located on a port in the Caspian Sea. Last of the Caucasian republics, or the Caucasus republics, I should say, ethnic is Georgia. And ethnically, Georgians are Georgian. And they have their own language, their own alphabet, and they practice Christianity. A little bit smaller population again here, 4.7 million people. Tbilisi is its capital. Tourism is economically a big part of it too. They are located on the Black Sea, so there are several resorts that do bring tourists to Georgia. And as far as mining goes, copper, coal, manganese, as well as oil can be found in Georgia as well. All right, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about our Central Asian republics. So we're going to talk about these 5. We're going to talk about Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. And one thing I do want to note about all 5 is, again, with the spread of Islam out of the Arabian Peninsula and its close proximity to that location, and certainly close to today's Southwest Asia, we can see that it makes sense that all 5 of these nations practice Islam. Kazakhstan, which is where we're going to start, is the largest of all these republics. It's about 4 times the size of Texas. For my U.S. listeners, that'll give you some perspective. And it has a population of about 14.8 million people. People here are going to be less densely populated as compared to some of the other republics here. The center of this country is very much dominated by steppe, and so farming is not as successful here, but it makes sense that given the large amount of grass that tends to thrive on a steppe, that raising livestock is actually going to be quite effective. As far as our mineral resources, we're looking at copper, manganese, gold, zinc, and petroleum. And we're also going to note that there are some factories here that make machinery, chemicals, as well as are in the processing of food. Half of the Kazakhs can draw their ancestry from the Mongols, and if we look back in world history, we can definitely see that this would have been an area that would have been conquered, and it would have been near the heart of the Mongolian Empire. We certainly have other ethnic minorities, the largest of which are the Russians, which makes sense, again, looking at the relative location of Kazakhstan. Looking at Uzbekistan now, which is just south of Kazakhstan, we have a comparison land size is slightly larger than the state of California, again, for my U.S. listeners. Larger population here, it's going to be more densely populated, about 25.7 million people who live mostly in the fertile valleys and the oasis. Agriculture certainly is going to be prominent here. You're going to see that it's one of the world's largest producers of cotton. However, in building up that cotton industry, they have depleted some of their natural resources like the Aral Sea. And we also know that in its urban populations, Tashkent, which is the capital, is its largest city as well. And it's also the industrial center of Central Asia, which is, again, these two industries, especially cotton when it comes to agriculture, as well as the industrial center. This is part of the reason why Uzbekistan has a larger population for this region. Looking at Turkmenistan now, when we look at size, it's larger than Uzbekistan as far as total area, but it has a smaller population due to the Gaguragam Desert. And one of the things to notice that's kind of unique to this desert is that you will see black sand. It also contains about 5.7 million people and has one of the world's largest reserves of natural gas, which helps to provide some economic stability to this region. Ashgabat is the capital and largest city. It's also the cultural center of Turkmenistan. Kyrgyzstan tends to be dominated by the mountain range of the Tian Shan, which, again, if we're looking at, would be part of certainly the border with China. Its valleys tend to have warm and dry summers, and the winters tend to get pretty chilly. However, in the highlands, which again, with the Tian Shan being right there, summers tend to be cooler, and winters tend to be quite bitterly cold. And given what we've studied with elevation this year in geography, that makes a lot of sense. As far as agriculture goes here, we're going to see cotton, we're going to see vegetables, certainly fruits are grown locally. When it comes to mineral resources, you're going to see certainly mercury and gold being part of this. But one of the things that I really want to note about Kyrgyzstan is that most of its population, of that 5 million people, tend to be bilingual. They tend to speak Kyrgyz, and they also tend to speak Russian. And one last thing to note here about Kyrgyzstan is its capital is Bishkek. All right, rounding out here with Tajikistan. This lies just south of Kyrgyzstan. Contains the highest mountain in Central Asia, which is the Ismail Samani Peak. Those mountains also, though, help to irrigate and produce streams for cotton production, certainly rice as well as fruit. The largest city and its capital is Dushanbe. And population-wise, we're looking at about 6.6 million people, most of which are Tajiks. And they tend to be related to the Persians. which we can see Iran certainly is not far away, as well as Afghanistan. And all of this area, for my world history fans, you would see was certainly at one point a part of the Persian Empire, if we look back at the ancient world. We also see that we have a fair amount of Uzbeks from Uzbekistan making their way into Tajikistan. Again, they make up about a quarter of the population. This is an area that in more recent history, around 1992, went through a pretty bitter civil war with its rival clans. And that war lasted about 5 years. So in 1997, there was a peace agreement that was reached, but the tensions in this area are still quite high. And so it's certainly an area that is still dealing with quite a bit of internal conflict, although it has not escalated to war again. As always, for my students, for my listeners, check out the check-in quiz just to make sure you're kind of picking up on the big ideas. Look through the notes to kind of help you support with your answers. For my students, I hope this was helpful. Certainly ask me any questions that you have. For those of you who are just listening, I really appreciate you joining us in the learning. I hope in some way that maybe I'm encouraging a little bit more geographic literacy in the world. As always, I want to thank my students and all our listeners for checking out this video. I really appreciate you taking the time, and have a great day. We'll see you next time.